Hello everyone, welcome back to the art show. I'm Dalida, the video coordinator at University Centers. If you've seen the marquee above PC Theater or the TV screens inside PC, I am the person responsible for running all those ads. Along with that, I film and edit all of our events, including all the virtual events that have been going on this quarter. Before I did video stuff though, I started off as a painter. It's been a long time since I picked up a paintbrush, but I figured during quarantine I'd try to get back into it. So for this week's episode of the art show, we will be watching a speed painting of a 1-hour painting sketch I did of a Scandinavian landscape. If you want to see some of my other work, feel free to follow me on Instagram at dalida.nr. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so you want to gather your materials first. I've got paintbrushes in varying sizes, pencil and eraser, a little paint mug with water in it. The surface I'm working on is a sketchbook today, and I like to use aluminum foil to mix my paints onto. And of course you want to have paint. I'm using a lot of acrylic paint today, and I've just gathered this over the years, so that's where I got that. Okay, so this video will be a bit of a stream of consciousness as I watch over my old recording here, so bear with me. First, I am sketching out the part of the painting that is going to be a little harder to define with just paint itself. So the in this painting is just a little house in the middle of this landscape that I feel is the hardest part to make up as you paint. The rest of this painting will just be free painting because it'll just be shapes and color. That's pretty much the basis of painting. You need to be good with shapes and color. Personally, I don't like drawing very much because it's too precise for me. So either you're a drawing person or a painting person. Actually, that's not true. You can be many things. You can have multiple talents, but I find that people tend to gravitate towards one or the other. So that's about all the drawing I'm going to do for this painting. I'm grabbing some paints and I'm deciding what colors I want to do. First of all, I need to start with the thing that's in the way back of the entire painting. So when you're painting anything with acrylic paints, at least, you always want to work from everything that's in the background slowly all the way up to the thing that's most in the foreground. So the thing that's most in the background in this painting is the sky. So I am laying out all the colors I think I'll need for the sky. The sky is going to be pretty involved. It's about probably the most complicated part of this painting. So I've got blues, pinks, oranges, a little bit of yellows, and some white. So my strategy for mixing paint is to think about what the darkest color of that part of the painting will be. So I have a blue that's not super dark, but still rather dark, and I started with that. I use white a lot to lighten up from there. To go lighter, white is always good, but to go darker, you should not use black. I used to use a lot of black to go darker back in the old days, but it makes your colors look more desaturated and kind of muddy. What you want to do instead is look at the color wheel, and to make a color darker, you want to pick the color that's on the opposite side of the color wheel to make it darker, if that makes sense. I believe that's called the complementary color, basic color theory. Let me see. Yes, it's the complement. So you want to choose the complement of the color to make it darker. Alright, so I have now laid out some bright parts of the sky that I want to have seamlessly blend into the darker parts. As you can see, it looks a little funky right now because it's just two blocks of color sitting next to each other, but I am going to work with the fact that both of these patches of color are still wet. I'm going to blend wet into wet, so I'm making a lot of intermediate colors to make this transition a lot more smooth and make that gradient look a lot better. So I like to work fast to keep up that wet on wet strategy. You can also clean your paintbrush and just douse it in wet water and go over it that way. That works as well, but it also thins out the paint. So I like to make new colors to act as the in-between phases between the dark spots and the light spots. So this is about all the blue I want to see in the sky. So I'm going in now, I'm trying to introduce some light pinks and light oranges into the sky. So I made a dark pink / purplish color, and I'm now blending that with the dark blue. Always, again, work dark to light, so I started off with dark, and all the spots that I want to see this sort of pinkish hue. And I am now coming in with my lighter colors and slowly just blending it in, like I did with the blues. Yeah, blending is your best friend in my opinion, usually with all painting methods. I'm not as familiar with oil painting or watercolor as I am with acrylic painting, but from my understanding, you want to be good at blending for all the methods that you can use. There's also different strategies, like blending strategies you can do to kind of optimize what you want to come out of the painting. So you can, if you want to build more texture, you can try to blend like wet into dry, if that makes sense. And well, you can't really do dry into dry. You can do like kind of dry into like really dry as well, and that will make a totally different texture as well. So before you start painting, if you are new to it, I recommend just taking a sheet of paper and experimenting with the different methods of wetness that you can add to your paint and your brush, and seeing what kind of results that takes or that gets out. You can also have a loaded paintbrush full of color that you dip into your water, and that will make it super wet, and that's another thing you can do to produce some cool effects from your painting, and how you can make the colors blend into each other in different ways. So I've layered up my light peaches and light peach colors and like kind of cream yellow colors into the sky now. I'm going back with some blue and some of the light colors to try to integrate them better, if that makes sense. I'm having a little bit of trouble in this little section of the sky because the blue is so dark here. I'm also coming in with a new type of paint stroke. I'm going in short little strokes to try to mimic how the clouds might look in the sky. But for now I'm going to leave it alone. I'm going in and painting the house just a super bright red. It's great contrast, it just looks beautiful in my opinion. Contrast is a pretty cheap trick when you're making any piece of art. It usually looks pretty good. That being said, so do things that are low contrast. Honestly, just go with what you think looks good and you'll make something that is visually appealing to look at. Also, when you're painting or when you're making any sort of piece of artwork, it tends to not look good in the middle of it. This is just a phenomenon I've noticed. So if you get discouraged, just keep working on it. Trust me, it'll like come together at the end. So for example, that sky I think looks okay so far, but I'm not sure. Like I want to do more to it, but it wasn't coming to me in this moment. So I just left it alone and I kept working on the next thing in the order of background to foreground. So the next thing would be the house, and I'll go back to the sky later and it'll improve from there. So you just gotta keep at it. So this is a little bit of a mistake. I started to draw the trees for the forest that'll be next to the house, but as you can see, there's just pure white paper behind those trees. Now I thought that I would just have leaves covering up that pure white paper, but that's not really good because you don't want it to be just, you know, a really thick covering of leaves. So I'm going back in and adding a little piece of sky that would just be like really light yellow coming in. And now you can see what happens when you try to paint wet over wet. It's not making any defined shapes whatsoever. It wants to blend. So I'm going to leave this alone for a bit, wait for it to dry, and then go back to this forest. So in the meantime, I'm going to head back to the house painting and work on adding some snow to the roof. This is white with just a touch of yellow. Snow is really easy, but it's also never just like plain pure white, so you always want to have some sort of color integrated into it. And I chose yellow because it was cozy and it matched the vibe of this whole piece. So right now, adding some details to the windows. As you can see, it's not perfectly proportioned right now. Some windows are definitely bigger than other ones. They're not all in alignment and they're not all facing the correct direction even. But that's okay because this is a sketch and we can go back and fix that later on. So right now, just working on some details, chimney. Now that the sky has dried up, I can go back to the forest. Acrylic dries really fast, I've discovered, which works for me, but some people don't like it. Whereas like oil paint will take days to dry, for example. But since I like to layer my paint onto dry backgrounds, I prefer acrylic paint. But sometimes it works against you because sometimes things dry way too fast, which in that case you can go ahead and pick up something called acrylic medium, which adds more like wetness to your paint. Anyway, okay, so I've decided that in the foreground I want there to be some foliage coming in from the right, so I've laid out the branches for that, but I'm not going to touch it for now. It's just a guideline for me for when I'm actually painting that part. Adding more details to the house here. I've also finished laying out the tree bases for the forest, and going back to the sky a little bit because I made a color that I thought would really fit, and I'm just adding like small little clouds, small little details of clouds. So because the clouds I'm adding are not like behind anything, I can easily go back to this part of the painting if I wanted to like edit the clouds that were underneath the forest, for example. Like that's done, that's over. I can't do that. So sometimes you can go back, sometimes you can't. Alright, so mixing some greens and yellows and beiges here. I'm gonna start going into the forest. Painting foliage, at least in a sketch, I find is really easy if you just go ahead and dab blobs of color onto the canvas like I'm doing. So always when you're painting acrylic, start off with the darkest shade you're going to use. So this is the darkest shade of green I'm going to use in this forest, and then make lighter colors and build on top of it. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. This looks good. And honestly, it's so easy. So I have a smaller paintbrush right now, and I'm just laying down blobs of color, just like little blips of color, and just building it on top of each other. That's about it. This is a life hack for you guys in terms of painting trees. Now, if you're doing, a painting where the tree is a lot more in focus or closer to the foreground, you're probably going to want to actually paint out the leaves. But for the purposes of a forest that's in the background, this works pretty well. And it's also the reason I prefer painting over drawing, is because it's a lot more messy. Not messy, but free, I guess, than drawing is. And you can get a lot of ground covered a lot faster than with drawing. Alright, so coming back here, my camera stopped recording, so I kind of skipped a little bit, but all I did was add some details to the windows, and now I'm coming in with the red to kind of fix the perspective a little bit and try to make them look more even. It's just a little sketch, so I'm not too concerned about how it looks in terms of everything being in proportion to one another, as long as I kind of have this bad habit of eyeballing everything. So if it looks good to my eyes, then I'm fine with it. I'm going in with a really small paintbrush for these details. Also, you don't have to use a paintbrush when you're painting. You can use something called a pallet knife, which is just kind of what it sounds like. It's kind of like a cake cutter looking object, and you paint with really thick dabs of paint, and you layer that on top of each other. If you're interested in that, the textures that come out of those paintings are really cool looking, so I would look up some videos of palette knives. Alright, so continuing to fix up some details in the house here. As you can see, the painting is almost done already. This is maybe about 45 minutes in, and I've created enough to make it look like a little scene. So now I want to add some snow right in front of the house. So I mixed some blue with some white, but I decided this was a little bit too blue. It looked a little like muddy. So I got some more white out, and that's a much better white than I'm using here. So just layering it on top and kind of just filling in all the space with blue. As you can see, I'm making like kind of a texture with my brush to make it look like the house is sitting on like fluffy snow. Also, I'm sorry that my camera decided to move at this part of the video. It's taped to a selfie stick on top of a Target box, so that's some movie magic for you. Okay, so I'm mixing white with blue again now to make some shadows in the snow, just around the house and in the little field. So again, adjusting on the canvas is something I do a lot. So if I decide it looks too blue, I come in with white and just paint on top of the canvas directly. And like I've been doing that from the sky to the trees to the house. So it's very forgiving. So the version of an eraser when you're painting is just painting on top of it. So continuing with the snow details here, I think at this point I wanted to try to add some sun textures to reflect the sky. So I think I tried to go in with some yellow. Yeah, I did. As you can see, it didn't really look good. So I went ahead and erased that with some white. But yeah, at this point I'm feeling like the field is pretty done. That's the nice thing about snow is it's really easy. But at this point I'm almost there. I'm just adding some little pieces of interest to that field in terms of foliage. So I'm gonna go ahead and make the skeleton of that with brown. And now going back to the foliage on the right, I'm finally going to flesh that out. So adding some little details on the branches, which will mostly be covered up, so I don't know what was the point, but whatever. First I mix the darkest green that I'm going to use. Just always mix the darkest color first. And pretty much the same method as with the other forests, except the blobs of paint are a little bigger this time. Start off with all the dark greens I'm going to use, and then just build up from there with lighter colors. Alright, so as you can see, I'm mixing it with yellow and white because I want some warmth in this foliage. If I wanted it to be cooler, I might mix it with some blues. This is kind of like color theory and some intrinsic knowledge. You can kind of look at a color and like see what colors it might be composed of, if that makes sense. A really easy way to distinguish this is warm tones have a lot of like undertones of reds and yellows, whereas cooler tones have undertones of blues and purples. So the vibe of this painting is definitely warm, so I'm sticking to a lot of yellow as the base for most of my mixing. Now I finished up the foliage on the right, and I finished up the foliage in the field. Now just some very last minute things. I wanted to change the color of the chimney. I decided it was too dark and it contrasted too much, so it wasn't fitting the vibe correctly. And other than that, I decided I wasn't quite done with the sky. I tend to overwork the sky in a lot of my paintings just because like skies are beautiful, so it's really nice to give them attention. I'm going back and adding details to the clouds here. This is where it's fun to do the little trick where you add very, very light, almost white dabs to certain elements of the painting. So on the clouds you can see just adding a tiny bit of white makes it look so much more majestic, I guess. Alright, so I'm pretty satisfied with how the sky looks. As you can see, the paper at this point is crinkling a bit. Use some canvas if you're doing something that's more involved than a painting sketch, but for my purposes this is okay. So here I am just finishing up last minute pieces of the house, and once I've done that, this painting will be pretty done. So this took about an hour or so, and It was easy to make a little scene just using blobs of paint and a knowledge of color. So once you're done with your work, you gotta sign it and we're good to go. All right, so here's the finished product. So I hope this kind of made you guys feel like painting is not quite as hard as it looks like. All you need is an understanding of color and some paintbrushes and you are good to go, at least for landscapes. Alright, thank you for watching. I hope that you guys learned something useful out of this and you're inspired to either go paint or make some other type of art yourself. Goodbye!